As we move into 2026, something important has changed. The lines aren't blurry anymore, they aren't subtle, and they aren't about culture wars or party loyalty. This moment isn't left versus right. It isn't red versus blue. It's authoritarianism versus democracy. It's oligarchs versus everyone else. People can feel it, even if they don't have the language yet. That sense that the rules no longer apply evenly. That feeling that decisions are being made far away by people you never voted for, with consequences you're expected to absorb quietly. When people say democracy feels fragile right now, they're not being dramatic. They're noticing that wealth is concentrating, power is hardening, and accountability is thinning out. This isn't about personalities, it's about structures. Who gets protected when systems fail? Who gets squeezed when resources tighten? And who gets told to stay quiet for the sake of stability? Something fundamental is being tested right now, and pretending it's business as usual won't protect anyone. Democracy doesn't usually disappear all at once. It erodes quietly, through loopholes, exemptions, and rules written for the powerful. When wealth concentrates, influence follows. When influence goes unchecked, public voice weakens. And when people are exhausted or divided, that erosion accelerates. That's why this moment matters. Not later, not after the damage is done. Now. What's being tested right now isn't ideology. It's whether public power still outweighs private wealth. Here's the part most people underestimate. Oligarchy doesn't arrive with an announcement. It doesn't declare itself the enemy of democracy. It presents itself as efficiency, as expertise, as necessary decisions made by people who claim to know better than the public. Power concentrates quietly, through mergers, through deregulation, through courts, contracts, and closed-door influence. Democracy weakens not because people stop caring, but because fewer decisions are actually left in public hands. The more wealth accumulates at the top, the more insulated it becomes from consequence. Rules bend, exceptions multiply, accountability thins out, and eventually people are told that their expectations are unrealistic, that participation is naive, that stability requires obedience. That's how democratic erosion gets reframed as realism, and how inequality starts calling itself order. This shift doesn't happen because people agree to it. It happens because access replaces accountability. Decisions move farther away from everyday life. Language becomes technical. Responsibility becomes diffused. People are told that complexity makes participation impossible, that experts must decide, that speed matters more than consent. Over time, democracy stops feeling like a right. It starts feeling like a nuisance. And that's when oligarchy becomes sustainable without ever naming itself. Democracy erodes fastest when people are told it's inefficient. And inequality is framed as the cost of order. This isn't about individual villains or heroic leaders. It's about structures that decide whose lives are protected and whose lives are treated as expendable. In oligarchic systems, influence isn't distributed equally. It's purchased. Policy follows capital. Regulation bends toward donors. Public goods get reframed as costs instead of responsibilities. Democracy depends on friction, on debate, on participation that slows decisions down. Oligarchy removes that friction. It streamlines power. It bypasses consent. The result isn't stability, it's quiet extraction. People are told that this is just how modern governance works, that resistance is outdated, that alternatives are unrealistic. That's how structural imbalance becomes normal, and how inequality starts feeling inevitable instead of engineered. When wealth determines access, democracy becomes conditional. Some voices carry weight, others are tolerated, then ignored. Participation turns symbolic. Elections continue. But outcomes stop reflecting public needs. This isn't because people stopped caring, it's because systems were redesigned to filter them out. When power answers upward instead of outward, inequality deepens, and democracy slowly turns into a managed appearance instead of a lived reality. Over time, people are trained to expect less influence, less transparency, less say over the conditions of their lives. That's how inequality stops being debated and starts being treated as permanent. And permanence is the illusion oligarchy depends on most. Authoritarianism doesn't always arrive wearing a uniform. Sometimes it shows up as policy language, as law and order, as emergency powers that never quite expire. It grows when fear is treated as justification, when safety is used to excuse surveillance, when dissent is reframed as disruption. Oligarchic systems depend on this overlap. Power concentrates at the top while control spreads downward. People are told these measures are temporary. That stability requires sacrifice, that compliance is patriotic. Over time, exceptions become permanent, rights become conditional, and enforcement becomes selective. This is how authority hardens without needing a coup. It just keeps tightening until resistance feels risky and silence starts to feel safer. Control works best when it feels justified, when people are told it's for their own protection, when fear is framed as responsibility. As power concentrates, enforcement becomes uneven. Some people are watched closely, others are quietly exempt. That's how authority stops being neutral. It starts serving those already insulated from its consequences. Over time, people adjust their behavior. They speak less, they expect less, they internalize limits that were never democratically agreed upon. That's how silence becomes normalized, and how democracy erodes without ever being formally abolished. When fear sets the rules, consent becomes performative. People comply not because they agree, but because the cost of resistance feels too high. This is where the economy stops being neutral. Oligarchy isn't just political power, it's economic power shielding itself from consequence. When wealth concentrates, risk moves downward, costs get externalized, losses get socialized, profits stay private. People are told this is efficiency, that markets know best, that austerity is responsible governance. But austerity doesn't hit everyone equally. It tightens around workers, renters, and communities already stretched thin, while those at the top remain insulated from the fallout. Democracy weakens when survival takes all your energy, when wages stagnate, when healthcare becomes conditional, when debt replaces security. That's not accidental. Economic pressure limits political participation. When people are busy surviving, they're easier to govern, and when governance serves capital first, inequality becomes policy instead of outcome. Economic pressure doesn't just limit choices, it reshapes behavior. People delay care, they accept worse conditions, they take on more debt just to stay afloat. Over time, survival crowds out participation. Civic engagement feels like a luxury. Organizing feels risky. Speaking up feels costly. That's how economic systems quietly discipline populations, not through force, but through precarity that keeps people compliant and exhausted. Precarity isn't a side effect, it's a control mechanism, and it keeps inequality stable by design. And systems that rely on precarity rarely survive public scrutiny for long. If all of this feels exhausting, that's not a failure on your part. Democracy requires participation, participation requires energy, and exhaustion drains both. Oligarchic systems don't need public approval to function, they just need people too tired to resist. When work barely covers survival, civic engagement drops. When healthcare is unstable, risk-taking disappears. When time is scarce, organizing feels impossible. Burnout isn't just personal, it's political. A tired population is easier to govern than an angry one. Fatigue reduces protests to complaints, and complaints are easy to ignore. This is why systems that concentrate wealth invest so heavily in keeping people overwhelmed. Exhaustion becomes enforcement, not through violence, but through pace, pressure, and precarity. Exhaustion narrows imagination. It makes the present feel permanent and the future feel unreachable. When people are stretched thin, they stop expecting change. They lower demands. They internalize limits that were never democratically chosen. That's why burnout is useful to power. It replaces resistance with resignation. It turns survival into the ceiling instead of the baseline. A system that runs on fatigue doesn't need repression. It just needs people too tired to push back. Over time, fatigue stops feeling temporary. It starts feeling like reality. And when exhaustion feels normal, systems that should be questioned stop being questioned at all. That's how control survives without force, by making exhaustion feel unavoidable. If democracy doesn't collapse all at once, it weakens when people are told their expectations are unrealistic, when demanding fair wages is framed as entitlement, when asking for healthcare or safety is treated like a burden. Oligarchy thrives when the public is convinced to lower the bar, to accept less representation, less accountability, less voice. Participation becomes symbolic. Voting still happens, but decisions are increasingly insulated from public pressure. People are encouraged to focus on personal survival instead of collective power, to adapt quietly rather than push back together. That's how democracy turns procedural instead of lived, and how power shifts without ever announcing itself. Lowered expectations are not a personal failure, they are taught. When people are told change is unrealistic, they stop asking for it. When demands are mocked, silence feels safer than speaking. And when participation feels pointless, disengagement looks rational. This is how democratic energy gets drained without banning elections. Rights still exist on paper, but access to them narrows in practice. Over time, people adjust to less influence. They call it maturity, they call it realism, but it's actually resignation. That's how power shifts quietly, not through takeover, but through consent that's been worn down by pressure. Resignation is one of the most effective tools of oligarchy. It keeps people compliant without needing repression, and it turns survival into a substitute for democracy. This moment isn't about fear, it's about clarity. Democracy isn't an abstract idea. It's whether people have real influence over the conditions of their lives. Safety, wages, healthcare, housing, voice, dignity. Those aren't radical demands, they're democratic ones. Oligarchy depends on distraction, on exhaustion, on people believing that nothing can really change. Democracy survives when people stay awake, when they remember their power, when they refuse to accept less than participation. We know which side we're on. The question is whether we're willing to defend it before the choice disappears. Democracy doesn't survive on autopilot. It survives through attention, participation, and collective memory. When people disengage, power doesn't disappear. It concentrates, it hardens, and it moves further out of reach. Oligarchy thrives when the public feels small, when systems feel inevitable, when survival replaces solidarity. But history shows something else too. Systems only hold as long as people comply. And compliance is not the same as consent. Staying awake doesn't mean living in fear. It means staying present, staying connected, and refusing to hand over your voice quietly. Democracy depends on people believing their participation still matters, that their voice carries weight, that collective action can still change outcomes. Once that belief disappears, power stops answering to the public, and oligarchy finishes what exhaustion started. If this resonates, share it, stay engaged, and don't let exhaustion decide the future for you.